Bhishma Nirvana by Dr. Nilesh Oak. Chapter 10 Conflicting Observations. There must be no barriers to freedom of inquiry. There is no place for dogma in science. The scientist is free and must be free to ask any questions, to doubt any assertions, to seek for any evidence, to correct any errors. J. Robert Oppenheimer. Ancient narrations contain observations that contradict each other within a specific text or between specific texts. The Mahabharata text is not an exception to this reality. The majority of Mahabharata researchers are intimidated by such conflicting evidence, and they approach this problem by denying it, hiding under it, and hoping that no one notices. Of course, what can be considered conflicting evidence depends on how one arrived at his. Instead of listing all relevant evidence that corroborates and conflicts for one's claim, these researchers discuss only that evidence that tend to support their claims. These researchers avoid, ignore, and deny all evidence that would either conflict or worse, falsify their claim. They undermine such evidence and or explain it away when caught red-handed, and when they realize that avoiding it, ignoring, or denying is not an option. This illogical approach naturally leads to erroneous results. But even when, by luck, such illogical methods lead to a correct result, the critical analysis and comparison of multiple claims remains a challenge. The truth-likeness method, TM, provides a solution to the challenge of enabling comparison of multiple claims. We do not have to stop by simply listing observations that conflict with other claims. There is much more that one can do with these apparent or real conflicting observations for one's claim. They can be critically discussed and analyzed, and by luck, one may succeed in explaining them, not explaining them away. In some cases, it is possible, as I have shown in my previous books, to demonstrate the interpolated nature of such observations and to show what might have led to such interpolations. It is also possible to demonstrate, as I have shown in my previous books, how combinations of errors, that is translation, transcription, transliteration, transposition, interpolation, etc., can lead to formation of conflicting evidence. Let's analyze 6 specific instances of evidence or observation that appear to conflict with my claim for the details of Bhishma Nirvana. 10.1 Bhishma on the bed of arrows for only 58 days. Most Mahabharata researchers believe in this dogma of Bhishma lying on the bed of arrows for only 58 days. This dogma is so entrenched in the popular psyche that Mahabharata researchers and enthusiasts take this for granted. Since numerous researchers were referring to it, I too assumed that the duration of 58 days must be a correct number. I assumed naively but justifiably that these researchers must have read the Mahabharata text. I was wrong. When I decided to determine the chronology of Mahabharata war, each piece of evidence led me to the year 5561 BCE. The claim of 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharata war is not my original claim. This is because Dr. P.V. Vartak had proposed this year based on different methodology that combined gut feel, intuition with evidence of Mahabharata text along with evidence of Puranas and the rest of the ancient Indian narratives. Naturally, when I began researching the events of Bhishma Nirvana, still in the context of my first book, I wanted to find out what Dr. Vartak had proposed for the day of Bhishma Nirvana. Dr. Vartak had assumed the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows to be equal to 58 days. However, he collected almost all relevant references of Bhishma Nirvana and realized that they were conflicting with the claim of 58 days. He made multiple attempts to interpret and reinterpret, rationalize, and justify his interpretations to make the case for 58 days for Bhishma on the bed of arrows. The details of his attempts can be read in his book Swayambhu, originally in Marathi. However, an English translation is available in my first book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? The Mystery of Arundhati. The takeaway for our current discussion is that I also began with this assumption of 58 days. However, I went deep into my investigation. I realized that this assumption or claim of 58 days was untenable. Even then, and not unlike Dr. Vartak, I spent about 6 months trying to interpret, to reinterpret, proposing ad hoc hypotheses to rationalize and to justify the assumption of 58 days. Here was my dilemma. I had tested the claim of 5561 BCE for the year and the claim of 16 October for the first day of Mahabharata war with great success, and the claim was supported by enormous evidence. On the other hand, the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows calculated from the 10th day of the war, that is 25th October 5561 BCE, until the day of the winter solstice 31st January 5560 BCE amounted to 98 days. This duration of 98 days could not be reconciled with the claim of 58 days. And I wrote, I felt as if I had reached a dead end. The difference of more than 1 or 2 days was unacceptable. Never mind the difference of 40 days. I decided to accept the conclusion that the year 5561 BCE, although superior to any other attempt and despite being the best approximation to the truth, was at least not corroborated by the Mahabharata observations related to Bhishma Nirvana, emphasis 9. I wondered what led other researchers to feel cocksure about their assumption of 58 days and if they were successful in corroborating this evidence for their claimed year of Mahabharata war. I did analyze works of other researchers, and what I discovered can only be described as a royal disaster. So I wrote, naturally I was curious to verify corroboration claimed by other researchers for the day of Bhishma Nirvana. Other researchers have proposed multiple years separated by millenniums. These researchers were not only convinced that they could explain the Mahabharata observations of Bhishma Nirvana, but also considered these Mahabharata observations as critical in building their lifetime. What is more interesting is the fact that these researchers were blissfully unaware of the contradictions their proposed day of Bhishma Nirvana posed for these observations. In the next chapter, we will look at some of the illogical attempts of researchers trying to rationalize and justify the duration of 58 days for Bhishma on the bed of arrows. Let's return to my dilemma of 98 days versus 58 days. My Shraddha and Nishtha, in the words of Vyasa, was being tested. As a last resort, before giving up, I decided to try an ingenious experiment. I speculated purely from the idea of truth that if my theory and its predictions were independently testable was also true, my theory would then provide me with successful predictions and I would be able to find observations corroborating my proposed timeline. And what was my action plan? I decided to reread the Mahabharata text, this time with emphasis on post-war incidents. I reread the Mahabharata text, by now a familiar and useful exercise, specifically Bhishma and Shalya and then Sautik, Stri, Shanti and Anusashan Parvas, looking for all observations that would allow me to build the timeline between fall of Bhishma and Bhishma Nirvana. I was by luck immensely rewarded for my efforts. My immense reward is described in this book, but what made Mahabharata researchers think that the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows was only 58 days? The answer can be found in this one reference of the Mahabharata text. Anushasan Parva CE 153-27 GP 167-27 Ashtapanchashatam ratriha shayanasyadyame gataha shareshu nishitagreshu yatha varshashatam tatha. When Yudhishthira arrived at Kurukshetra on the day of the winter solstice after spending 50 nights in Hastinapura, Bhishma told Yudhishthira that he felt the past 58 nights while he was lying on the bed of arrows as if equal to 100 years. That is very long time. That's it. It is hard to conceive that merely based on one chronology reference, these researchers could have reached such a disastrous conclusion. Unfortunate indeed, but true. Is there any other way we can interpret this observation? We sure can. Recall what Krishna had said to Bhishma the first time Yudhishthira and his party met Bhishma at Kurukshetra after the coronation of Yudhishthira. Shanti Parva CE 51:14 GP 51:14 Panchashatam Shatach Kuru Pravera Shesham Dinanam Tava Jivitasya Tataha Shubhai Karmapalo Dayestvam Sameshasya Bhishma Vimuchya Deham. Krishna told Bhishma that he had an additional 56 days to live. That is, the day of the winter solstice was about 56 days away from the day of their conversation. 10.1.1 Truth Likeness Score of -1. Let's begin our analysis by stating the worst case effect due to the evidence of 58 days for my claim. We may agree that simplistic interpretation of the majority of Mahabharata researchers, this piece of evidence goes against my claim, and thus truth likeness score of my proposal would go down by 1 point. 10.1.2 Reconciling 56 and 58 days. This gap of 2 days between Krishna's assertion of 56 additional days for Bhishma to be on the bed of arrows and Bhishma's comments of his being on the bed of arrows for 58 days can be reconciled in multiple ways. 10.1.2.1 Past latest 58 days. A straightforward reading of this reference can be interpreted to mean that Bhishma is simply referring to the past 58 days of his time on the bed of arrows. Numerous Mahabharata researchers failed to grasp this fact simply because they never bothered to identify all relevant astronomy and chronology references related to Bhishma Nirvana. All of them are listed in chapter 3 of this book. 10.1.2.2 Error in prediction for the day of winter solstice. An ordinary error in prediction for the day of winter solstice and the actual day of winter solstice can have an error of plus or minus 1 day. This is the same error we expect in the determination of the lunar tithi. 10.1.3 The problem of communication. In addition, it is not unusual to have an error of such magnitude plus or minus 2 when the intent is communicated in colloquial terms. For example, meeting after a week could be interpreted as either after 7 or 8 days. An error of plus or minus 2 days can easily occur depending on the person's method of counting, that is, whether he included both days, 1 the day of discussion and 2 the actual day of Bhishma Nirvana or not. 10.1.2.4 Actual scenario for the year 5561 BCE. The Mahabharata war began on 16th October 5561 BCE and Bhishma fell in the battle on the 10th day of the war, that is on 25th October 5561 BCE. The war continued for additional 8 days until 2nd November 5561 BCE. Bhima and Arjuna humbled Ashwatthama on 3rd November and Yudhishthira and his party went to the bank of Ganga river on 4th November. Yudhishthira and his party spent a month on the bank of Ganga river. Assuming they spent 29 days, that is duration of lunar month, at the Ganga river, they must have returned sometime on or after 2nd December. We will assume 2nd December for the sake of our narration as the day they entered Hastinapura. Yudhishthira was coronated as the king and he assigned administrative posts for individuals and honored Krishna. Let's assume that the days of 2nd through 4th December were spent in these activities. Yudhishthira and his brothers along with Krishna and others visited Bhishma at Kurukshetra on 5th December 5561 BCE. It is on this day that Krishna told Bhishma that the latter had 56 more days to live. In this case, we can interpret that Krishna was referring to the day of 30th January 5560 BCE, which was indeed 56 days away from this day. On the other hand, when Bhishma referred to past 58 days, he referred to days from the first meeting, that is 5th December, until the day 31st January 5560 BCE. When Bhishma spoke this statement, referring to his past 58 days on the bed of arrows. 10.1.3 Logic of stepwise regression, value of the evidence. Finally, I want to suggest a thought experiment to comprehend the value of each piece of evidence that leads to the total duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows. The analogy I use is that of stepwise regression, where one data point can be selectively removed to see the effect of the lack of the data point on the rest of the correlation. Let us enumerate the quantifying evidence that goes into the calculation of the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows. 1. 9 days of the war when Bhishma was lying on the bed, 10th through 18th day of the war. 2. Yudhishthira and his party on the bank of Ganga river for a month, 27 to 30 days. We will use the most conservative estimate of 27 days. 3. Returning of Yudhishthira to Hastinapura, his coronation, and then his going to Bhishma at Kurukshetra. Let us designate this unknown interval is equal to x days. 4. Krishna tells Bhishma that Bhishma had 56 more days to live. 5. Yudhishthira Bhishma Samvada begins and can be traced for at least 5 of the 6 days of total duration. 6. Yudhishthira went back to Hastinapura and stayed there for 50 nights before returning to Bhishma on the day of the Bhishma Nirvana. 7. Bhishma told Yudhishthira that he felt that the past 58 days on the bed of arrows is equal to 100 years, that is a long time. Our thought experiment involves removing any one piece of evidence at a time and gauging the impact of its absence on our ability to draw the conclusion for the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows. 1. If we remove the reference of 9 days of the war, we are still left with 27 plus x plus 56, that is 83 plus x days. 2. If we remove the reference of Yudhishthira on the bank of Ganga river for a month, we are still left with 9 plus x plus 56, that is 65 plus x days. 3. If we remove the reference of x days, we are left with 9 plus 27 plus 56, that is 92 days. 4. If we remove the reference to Krishna stating Bhishma had 56 more days to live, we are still left with 9 plus 27 plus x plus 5 plus 50 equal to 91 plus x days. 5. If we remove the reference of narration of up to 5 days of Yudhishthira Bhishma Samvada, we are still left with 92 plus x days. 6. If we remove the reference to Yudhishthira staying in Hastinapura for 50 nights, and we are still left with 92 plus x days. 7. If we remove the reference to Bhishma stating that he felt his duration of the past 58 days on the bed of arrows as being like a long time, we are still left with 92 plus x days. 8. If this one reference of 58 days is removed, we can still estimate the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows. In fact, removal of this one reference, not that I am suggesting it, but it will remove all the apparent confusion related to Bhishma Nirvana events. On the other hand, anyone insisting on 58 days has the onus to explain at least 59 specific references and long narration that is carried over 8 long parvas, Bhishma through Anushasan parvas of the Mahabharata text. In addition, the context of Bhishma's statement of 58 days can be easily explained. This is not possible for the remaining references either individually or cumulatively that are spread over 8 parvas. What this thought experiment demonstrates is that the Mahabharata text evidence is very robust and the removal of any data point leads to an estimation of duration of Bhishma from being 65 plus x days to 92 plus x days. And this estimate is using the most conservative criteria. The actual duration was longer since we do not know the exact value of x. However, we do know that it is not 0. This thought experiment should make it clear to all and sundry that the decision to stick to one arbitrary or selective reference of Bhishma Nirvana was illogical, unscientific, and frankly imprudent. 10.2 Bhishma Nirvana during lunar month of Magha. The majority of Mahabharata researchers insist that the lunar month at the time of Bhishma Nirvana was Magha. They base this claim on one reference of Mahabharata text. Anushasan Parva CE 153-28 GP 167-28 Magho yam samanu prapto masaha punyo yudhishthira Tribhagaseshah pakshoyam shuklo bhavitumarhati. Bhishma states that it appears to be the auspicious month of Magha. Fortunately, the explanation for this discrepancy, at least for my claimed timing of 31st January 5560 BCE for the day of Bhishma Nirvana, can be explained rather easily. 10.2.1 Truth Likeness Score of -1. Let's begin our analysis by stating the worst case effect due to this evidence of Magha as the lunar month at the time of Bhishma Nirvana. We may agree that per simplistic interpretation of the majority of Mahabharata researchers, this piece of evidence goes against my claim and thus the truth likeness score for my proposal would go down by 1 point. 10.2.2 Case of the month to be something else than Magha. When we combine evidence that leads to 92 plus days for the duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows with evidence for the lower and upper tithis of Bhishma Nirvana, we realize that the lunar month of Bhishma Nirvana would be Falgun, even Chaitra, at least in principle, but it cannot be Magha. This is because the limits on the tithi of Bhishma Nirvana come out to be between Falgun Shukla 12 and Chaitra Purnima. 10.2.3 Case of the Adhik Masa as an explanation. If we assume Adhik Masa occurring sometime during the year of Mahabharata war, the month of Falguna, purely based on the position of the full moon, could be designated as Magha. Numerous Mahabharata researchers have made such an assumption. My explanation for this mention of Magha when the month was Falguna follows this logic. However, there is one additional explanation possible, and I prefer it over the assumption of Adhik Masa, again based on specific research which is beyond the purview of this book. 10.2.4 Error due to nomenclature of lunar months. It is not unusual to come across lunar months named in our modern Hindu calendars where occasionally the name of the lunar month, when compared against the position of the corresponding full moon, appears inappropriate. For example, I have noted instances when the full moon is very near Nakshatra Magha. However, the month is still named as Pausha. Granted, this could be more likely the effect of the Adhik Masa correction happening in that year. But then, do recall that the Adhik Masa correction is occurring on an average every 2.5 years, and thus such instances of mismatch between the naming of a lunar month and the corresponding position of the full moon are common. 10.3 Bhishma Nirvana on Magha Shukla Ashtami 8 Anushasan Parva CE 153-28 GP 167-28 Maghoyam samanu prapto masaha punyo yudhishtara tribhagasesha pakshoyam shuklo bhavitum arhati. I deliberately separated the issue related to this reference of Mahabharata text into two parts. 1. Lunar month of Magha 10.3 and 2. Magha Shukla Ashtami 10.3. After stating that the month appears to be Magha, Bhishma continued and stated, second line of the shloka, that the timing appeared to be when 3 parts or 1/3 part of the paksha, fortnight or a month were remaining or has elapsed. Mahabharata researchers have written much in interpreting this one line. In fact, there are too many interpretations with every conceivable permutations and combination one can imagine. We will summarize them. 10.3.1 Lunar month of Magha or Falguna. We will resolve the issue of nomenclature or designation of the lunar month as described in section 10.2. If the month of Bhishma Nirvana is plus minus 1 month from Magha, we will accept it as corroborated. The actual difference could be due to the insertion of Adhik Masa or simply due to an error in nomenclature or designation. We will focus solely on Paksha and Tithi in the remainder of this discussion. 10.3.2 Paksha or Masa, 1/3 or 1/4, elapsed or remaining. Tribhagashesha has been interpreted in multiple ways, 1/3 or 1/4, and again 2/3 or 3/4. The confusion does not stop here. There is no agreement among the researchers as to whether this fraction applies to the paksha, that is lunar fortnight, or to the month. Depending on the interpretation selected, we have a series of dates that can be briefly summarized as 1. Shukla 3, 2. Shukla 4, 3. Shukla 5, 4. Shukla 8, 5. Shukla 12. And again, these tithis repeated for Krishna or Vadhyapaksha, that is Krishna 3, 4, 5, 8 and 12. Adding to this commotion a reasonable error in the determination of tithis for a time much further into antiquity, considering the unpredictable movement of the moon coupled with changes in the rotation of the earth contributing to unknown delta t correction desired, we can practically imagine tithis of both paksha from Dvitiya 2 through Navami 9 and Ekadashi 11 through Trayodashi 13. In effect, any tithi will do if it is not Pratipada 1, Amavasya 15, Dashami 10, Chaturdashi 14 and Purnima 15. Having said that, the assumption of Magha Shukla Ashtami has attained a certain status and therefore we will deal with it separately. 10.3.3 Magha Shukla Ashtami 8. One of the interpretations from 10.3.2 naturally leads to Magha Shukla Ashtami. However, it appears that the interpretation by Nilakantha Chaturdhar, the Mahabharata commentator of 17th century CE, is responsible for its popularity. In commenting on this reference, Nilakantha Chaturdhar wrote, Magho yamiti saumaschandraha masascha chaturbhagakarane sardha saptabhagatvat अष्टम्यर्धस्यानतीत त्वेन प्रथम भागस्य विद्यमानत्वात् त्रिभागशेषो भवतुमर्हतीत्यर्थः तेनाद्याष्टमीत्यर्थः. In brief, if you divide the lunar month, that is 30 days, in 4 parts, each part would amount to 7.5 days, and per his or Chaturdha's interpretation, 1/4 portion had elapsed and 3/4 were remaining. This would mean it was the tithi of Magha Shukla 8. To make reader aware of the complexity involved in the interpretation of this shloka, I will quote a comment of Sri Nityananda Mishra from one of the discussions very much related to this verse of Mahabharata text on one of the online forums, Bharatiya Vidvat Parishad. Sri Nityananda Mishra writes, is that the complete commentary or is something missing? We do not see any Anvay, nor do we see the explanation of Pakshaha, Shuklaha, so it is not certain what is the Anvay taken by Nilakanta. I do not have the source to check with me. Any interpretation, especially a claim like this, means Purnimanta or Amavasyanta, must be backed by complete parsing and grammatical analysis of the verse. Without an Anvay and without an explanation of each and every term, we are just building castles in the air. As we see 2 ayam terms, there seems to be 2 vakya. The Anvay then becomes very important. Is Tribhagasheshaha to be taken with the first sentence as the adjective of Masaha or as the adjective of Pakshaha in the second sentence? A possible Anvay, there may be other possibilities too. Hey Yudhishthir, Ayam Saumyaha Maghaha Masaha Samanu Praptaha Asti. Ayam Tribhagasheshaha Pakshaha Shuklaha Bhavitur Marhati. As per my limited knowledge, there should be 2 nouns, not counting adjectives, in nominative singular in the second sentence, so that we have X, Y, Bhavitum Arhati. If Tribhagasheshaha is to be taken with the Masaha in previous sentence, then what are the 2 nouns in the second sentence? And if Bhavitum Arhati is taken with Masaha, as seems from the possibly incomplete quotation of the commentary, and the whole verse is taken as one vakya, then why are 2 ayam terms used? Another important point is how Bhavitum Arhati to be interpreted and as per what Paninian rules. Specifically, what is the karta for Bhavitum Arhati and in what sense Bhavitum Arhati is used? Is it used in the sense of Bhavati or Bhavishyati or some other sense? This selective reference and its arbitrary interpretation led almost all Mahabharata researchers onto the wrong track. We will discuss the consequence of this unfortunate event in the next chapter. 10.3.4 Magha Shukla Chaturthi or Magha Krishna Chaturthi. Bharat Ratna and Mahamahopadhyaya P.V. Kane interpreted it as Magha Shukla Ashtami and suggested two additional possibilities. In his words, the difficulty is how to connect Tribhaga Shesha, whether as an adjective of Masa or Paksha. If we take it in the first way, these words were uttered on 8th of Magha Shukla. If we take it as an objective of Paksha, then they will have to be taken as uttered on the 4th of the bright half or on the 4th of the dark half, which may be regarded in its astrological effects as equal to Shukla Paksha, though the Tithi itself is in the dark half. In effect, he considered Magha Shukla 4 or Magha Shukla 8 or Magha Krishna 4 as three possible interpretations. Do recognize that with the assumption of correction of the name of the month, either due to Adhik Masa or simply due to nomenclature error, this can turn into Falgun Shukla 4, 8 or Falgun Krishna 4. I may mention that 31st January 5560 BCE, my proposed day of Bhishma Nirvana indeed was the day of Falgun Krishna 4. It was also the day after the day of the winter solstice 30th January 5560 BCE. 10.4 Timing of Krishna's peace mission before the war. We have shown how the timing of Mahabharata war itself was during the first half of Sharad season. There is one reference in Mahabharata text that conflicts with this conclusion. Udyog Parva CE 8167 GP 8367 Tato Vyapate Tamasi Surye Vimala Udnate Maitre Muhurte Samprapte Mrudvarchishi Divakare Kaumude Masi Revatyam Shardante Himagame Svitasasya Sukhe Kale Kalyaha Sattva Vatan Varaha. Long before the war, Krishna left from Upaplavya and went to Hastinapura on a peace mission to explore whether the war could be avoided. The Mahabharata text states, the timing of this instance is that of at the end of Sharad season and at the beginning of Hemanta season. This reference certainly conflicts with our assertion that the timing of the war was that of early Sharad season. The event of Krishna leaving Upaplavya was long before the war. The entire chronology evidence of Bhishma on the bed of arrows for more than 92 days goes against the claim of this one reference. The entire evidence of Sharad season description throughout the 18 days of the war also goes against this claim of one reference. The Mahabharata text also allows us to estimate the chronological timing of Krishna's leaving from Upaplavya at least 15 days and as much as 45 days before the first day of the war. The requirement of at least 42 days comes from another reference of Balarama's Tirtha Yatra, where he left for Saraswati river only after Krishna's return back to Upaplavya after a failed peace mission. Balarama left the Pandava camp on Nakshatra Anuradha and then travelled along the Saraswati river for 42 days before returning to Kurukshetra on the last and 18th day of the war to witness the club fight between Bhima and Duryodhana. This means that we include Balarama's Tirtha Yatra in our chronology consideration. Krishna's leaving from Upaplavya was at least 42 plus 18 plus 13 to x plus 56 days, that is 136 plus x days before the day of Bhishma Nirvana, and that would mean at least 15 days into Varsha season. Without going into the solutions of Balarama's Tirtha Yatra problem, it is enough to emphasize that there is enormous evidence against this lone reference which demands Krishna leaving from Upaplavya on a peace mission at the end of Sharad season. Those who are curious about the problem of Balarama Tirtha Yatra may read my first book. 10.5 Shakra Amavasya and first day of Mahabharata war. Krishna tells Karna that Shakra Amavasya would occur in 7 days and either the war preparations or the war itself could begin on this day. Udyog Parva CE 140-18 GP 142-18 Saptamat chapi divasat amavasya bhavishyati sangramam yojayet tantra tam yahuhu shakra devatam. The problem of Shakra Amavasya is rather peripheral to the subject of Bhishma Nirvana and is discussed here for the sake of completeness. Whether the war began in 7 days from the time of Krishna Karna Samvada or after a month and 7 days does have implications for corroborating Tirthayatra of Balarama. However, it does not have direct implications for the chronology of Bhishma Nirvana. 10.6 Late moonrise on the 14th day of the war. We have shown that the observations of the Mahabharata text, when analyzed judiciously, lead to the stringent condition of Kartika Amavasya as the first day of the Mahabharata war. This means the majority of the war took place during the Shukla Paksha of Margashirsha. Thus the 14th day of the war would be near Purnima, and thus the claim that the moon rose late in the night conflicts with the evidence for the phases and the positions of the moon through the 18 days of the war. I would encourage curious readers to read my first book for the explanation of this apparent late moonrise. The only reason I included this observation into the list of conflicting observations is because it conflicts with the assertion of Kartik Amavasya as the first day of the war, Shukla Paksha of the Margashirsha, when the majority of the war took place, and that the 14th day of the war must be near full moon day and thus nowhere close to the day that would result in a late moonrise. Summary. Bhishma's reference to 58 days can be easily understood in the context of his referring to the past 58 days leading to the day of Bhishma Nirvana and not to the total duration of him on the bed of arrows. On the other hand, anyone assuming 58 days to be the total duration of Bhishma on the bed of arrows would land in all kinds of illogical inferences. We will indeed see a demonstration of this in the next chapter. The problem of nomenclature of the month Magha or Falguna is rather easy to solve. Correction of Adhik Masa can lead to such an error. The error of plus or minus 1 month in the nomenclature of lunar month occurs frequently even in our times and can be validated by referring to the modern Hindu Panchanga or calendar. The problem of Tithi and its solution leads to multiple choices, and my claim date of 31st January 5560 BCE for the day of Bhishma Nirvana agrees with one of the many choices, including the interpretation by late P.V. Kane. The story continues in chapter 11.